Orchestrated Western narrative rewrite, eliminating AI patterns, intensifying pacing. The horse came out of the blizzard first, riderless, blood frozen on the saddle, dragging a man behind it by one tangled stirrup. Josie Bellamy heard the animal scream before she saw it, grabbed her dead husband's rifle, and threw open the cabin door barefoot into 2 feet of Montana snow. The stranger hung limp, his boot caught in leather, his face dragged raw against ice and rock. 5 children pressed against the window behind her. The youngest hadn't stopped crying in 3 days. And now this, a half-dead man bleeding on her land, in the worst storm Elkhorn Creek had seen in 20 years. Before we go any further, I need to ask, where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this story reaches. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to that storm. Josie cut the stirrup leather with the knife she kept on the porch rail. The man fell free and didn't move. His coat was torn open along the left side, and blood had soaked through everything underneath, freezing in dark sheets against his skin. The horse staggered toward the barn on instinct alone. "Mama!" Hattie stood in the doorway, 13 years old, with a kitchen knife in her fist. "Mama, what do we do?" "Get your brother." "Which one?" "Ezra, now!" Hattie disappeared. Josie knelt beside the stranger and pressed 2 fingers to his throat. Pulse. Weak, but there. She pulled his collar back and saw his face. Dark beard gone silver at the jaw. A deep gash above his left eye, already swelling shut. Hands curled against his chest, long-fingered, nails clean despite the blood. "Mister!" She shook his shoulder. "Mister, you hear me?" His lips moved. She leaned closer. "The horse," he whispered. "Don't let the horse die. She's all I got." Josie sat back on her heels, a man half dead in a blizzard, and his first words were about his horse. She'd known Robert Bellamy for 16 years, and he would have said the exact same fool thing. "Mama, I ain't helping you bring a stranger inside." Ezra stood in the doorway, 11 years old, his father's hunting knife stuck through his belt like a man twice his age. "Papa said—" "Your papa said a lot of things, Ezra. He also said a Bellamy don't let nothing die on their doorstep if they can help it." "This is different." "How?" "Because Papa ain't here to protect us if this man turns out wrong." The words hit her like a slap, not because they were disrespectful, but because they were true. She looked at her son, jaw set, shoulders squared, fear hiding behind all that stubborn pride. And she saw every night he'd spent lying awake since Robert died, listening for sounds in the dark, trying to be something he shouldn't have to be yet. "Ezra James Bellamy," she kept her voice level. "I have a rifle, you have a knife. Your sister's got the shotgun shells counted and sorted by the back door. We are not helpless. Now grab his arm before he freezes solid." Ezra grabbed the stranger's arm. He didn't say another word, but his hand never left that knife. They dragged him inside and laid him by the fireplace. Josie bolted the door and turned to find her household arranged like a battlefield. Hattie had positioned herself between the stranger and the little ones, knife still ready. Clementine, 8 years old, silent since the funeral, stood pressed against the far wall, watching with those enormous dark eyes that saw everything and said nothing. Sam sat on the floor, clutching a wooden horse, his thumb hovering near his mouth, caught between curiosity and the urge to hide. And Bertie wailed from the crib, each cry weaker than the last, 3 days of fever burning through her tiny body. "He's bleeding bad, Mama." Hattie nodded toward the stranger's side. "Real bad." Josie peeled back his coat. The gash ran from his lower ribs to his hip, deep enough to show muscle, the edges ragged from rock and ice. She'd stitched leather. She'd stitched canvas. She'd stitched a wound on Robert's arm once, years ago, while he bit down on a stick and told her she had steadier hands than any doctor he'd met. "I need the sewing kit," she said. "The good needle. And boil thread in the kettle first." "You're gonna stitch him?" Ezra asked. "Unless you want him bleeding out on the floor your papa built." She cleaned the wound with hot water and whiskey, the bottle Robert kept for emergencies that she'd never opened until tonight. The stranger came awake with a sharp breath, his hand shooting out and grabbing her wrist. Strong grip. Then he saw her face and let go like he'd touched a hot stove. "Easy," Josie said. "I ain't gonna hurt you." "Sorry, ma'am." His voice came out scraped raw. "Bad habit. Where am I?" "Bellamy Homestead, 12 miles north of Elkhorn Creek. You fell off the ridge trail, near as I can tell. Your horse dragged you the rest of the way." "She found you," he said, and something crossed his face that might have been gratitude. "Good girl. Trained her to find shelter in storms." "Smart horse. You got a name to go with her?" "Silas. Silas Thorne." "Well, Silas Thorne, I'm about to push a needle through your skin, and I'd appreciate it if you didn't grab me again." "Yes, ma'am." She stitched him. He didn't scream, didn't grab, didn't even flinch much. Just lay there with his jaw locked and his eyes fixed on the ceiling, breathing through his nose in slow, measured pulls. Josie had seen Robert take pain before. Loud, cursing, fighting it like an enemy. This man took it quiet, like something he'd practiced. 19 stitches, she said, when she'd finished, tying off the thread and pressing a clean cloth against the wound. "Not my prettiest work, but it'll hold." "It's good work." He turned his head to look at her handiwork. "Tight, even spacing, clean edges, better than most field—" He stopped himself. Josie caught it. "Better than most what?" "Nothing, ma'am. Just grateful." From the crib, Bertie coughed, a wet, rattling sound that made every person in the cabin go still. Josie was on her feet before the second cough came, lifting her daughter against her chest, feeling the heat pour off the child's small body like a stove left open. 3 days, Hattie said quietly, standing at her mother's elbow. "Fever won't come down. I've tried everything Mama Crawford wrote in the book. Peppermint tea, cool cloths, honey water. Nothing's working." "Dr. Finch?" Josie asked, though she already knew. "Drunk. Tommy Adler rode out yesterday to fetch him and came back saying the doctor couldn't stand up straight enough to mount his horse." Josie held Bertie closer. The baby's breathing sounded like paper tearing, each inhale a fight, each exhale a surrender. She'd heard this sound before. She'd heard it the night Robert's mother died, in a cabin much like this one, while the snow piled against the windows and help stayed too far away to matter. "How old?" The stranger's voice came from the floor. "Don't concern yourself," Josie said. "Ma'am, how old is that child?" 3. She's 3. Silas closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had changed in his face. The careful blankness was gone, replaced by an urgency that burned right through his pain. "Lift her up. Hold her so I can see her breathe." "You don't get to tell me her lungs are filling." His voice cut sharp, sharper than she'd heard from him. "I can hear it from here. The rattle, the gap between breaths. That's fluid building where air's supposed to be. If you don't clear it tonight, by morning she won't have enough room in her chest to take a full breath." Josie stared at him. "How do you know that?" "Because I've heard it before. In men, in women, in children. I know what it sounds like when someone's drowning from the inside." "Who are you?" He held her gaze. "Right now, I'm someone who can help your daughter. That's all that matters. You can ask your questions after." Ezra stepped forward. He'd been standing by the door the whole time, watching, listening, his young face working through feelings too big for his years. He planted himself between Silas and the crib. "Mama, don't. We don't know this man. We don't know what he's done or where he's from. For all we know, he's a murderer or a thief, and he's lying about everything." "Ezra, no!" The boy's voice cracked, and behind the anger, Josie heard what he was really saying. "Papa trusted that new foreman at the logging camp. Papa said he seemed like a good man. And that good man put Papa on the crew that got him killed. I ain't trusting nobody just because they talk pretty and look hurt." Silas looked at the boy. Didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Didn't try to argue. "You're right," Silas said. "You don't know me, and you've got every reason not to trust a stranger who showed up bleeding on your porch. Your daddy taught you to protect this family, and that's exactly what you're doing." He paused. "But I'm asking you to weigh that against what you're hearing from that crib. Listen to your sister breathe. Really listen. And then decide." The cabin went quiet, except for Bertie's labored breathing. That terrible, wet rattle, closer together now, the gaps between breaths growing longer. Ezra listened. His jaw clenched. His hand tightened on the knife handle until his knuckles went white. "Tell me what to do," the boy said. "But if you hurt her, I swear to God—" "If I hurt her, you can use that knife. Fair deal?" "Fair deal." They built the steam tent together, all of them. Silas couldn't stand, so he directed from the floor, his voice steady and precise. Hattie boiled water in every pot they owned. Ezra rigged blankets over the crib using rope and chairbacks, his hands quick and clever, the way they always were when he was building something. Josie crushed dried mint and sage between her palms, filling the cabin with a sharp green smell that cut through the sick room air. "More steam," Silas said. "Keep it thick. She needs to breathe nothing but wet heat for the next hour." "She's so small," Hattie whispered, adjusting the blanket tent with shaking hands. "She's too small for this." "Small don't mean weak," Silas said. "I've seen babies fight through things that would kill a grown man. They don't know they're supposed to give up, so they don't." Clementine appeared at Josie's side. No one had seen her move. She held out a small bundle of dried herbs, wild thyme, tied with string from the stash her mother had gathered the summer before Robert died. "Clem," Josie breathed. "Where did you—" The girl pointed to the loose board under the pantry shelf. Her mother's hiding spot. The place where Martha Crawford Bellamy had kept her most precious herbs, the ones she said were only for emergencies. "Good girl," Josie said, her throat tight. "That's exactly right." She added the thyme to the steam. The scent changed, deepened, and Bertie's next breath came slightly easier. Not much, but enough. "Honey," Silas said. "Warm honey with a drop of the mint water. Just a few spoonfuls at a time. It'll soothe the throat and help her swallow." "We're low on honey," Hattie said. "Maybe a quarter jar." "Use it. All of it." "But that's all we—" "Use it." Silas met Hattie's eyes. "You can't save honey and lose a sister." Hattie grabbed the jar. They worked through the night. Josie spooned honey water between Bertie's cracked lips, while Hattie held the baby upright to keep the fluid from settling deeper. Ezra kept the fire so hot the cabin walls sweated, feeding logs without being told, his face grim and focused. Sam had fallen asleep on the floor beside Silas, his small head against the stranger's arm, trusting the way only a child who hasn't learned better can trust. And Clementine sat cross-legged near the crib, silent as always, her hand reaching through the blanket tent to rest on Bertie's foot, the only comfort she knew how to give. Twice, Bertie stopped breathing. The first time lasted 3 seconds that felt like 30 years. Josie's heart stopped with her daughter's lungs. Silas said, "Turn her on her side." So calm and fast, it was like he'd been waiting for it. And Josie moved before she thought. And Bertie coughed and gasped and screamed. And that scream was the most beautiful sound Josie had ever heard. The second time, near 3 in the morning, lasted longer. 5 seconds. 6. Josie couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except hold her dying baby and pray to a God she'd been angry at for 2 solid years. "Pat her back," Silas said. "Between the shoulder blades, firm. Don't be gentle." "I'll hurt her." "You'll save her. Do it now, Josie." He used her name. First time. She didn't notice until later. She patted Bertie's back, firm, like he said, and the baby convulsed and coughed up something thick and terrible, and then sucked air like she'd been underwater and finally broke the surface. Josie sobbed, just once. One ragged sound she couldn't hold back. Then she wiped her face on her sleeve and kept going. Dawn came gray and slow. Bertie was breathing, still rough, still rattled, but steady. The gaps between breaths had evened out. The fever had dropped from burning to warm. She slept against Josie's chest with her tiny fist curled around a strand of her mother's hair, holding on the way she'd been holding on all night. Silas had passed out sometime around 4, his face chalk white, fresh blood seeping through Josie's stitches because he'd spent 5 hours directing a medical operation from the floor of a stranger's cabin instead of lying still like any sane man would. Josie looked at him. This man who'd told her to use all the honey, who'd known to turn a choking baby on her side, who'd called her by name in the worst moment of her life and made her hands move when her heart had frozen. "Mama." Hattie sat beside her, dark circles under her eyes, looking older than any 13-year-old should. "Mama, who is he? How does he know all that?" "I don't know yet." "Are you going to find out?" "When he wakes up, yes." Hattie was quiet for a moment. "He saved her, Mama. Whatever else he is, he saved Bertie." "I know." "So what do we do with him?" Josie looked at her daughter, at the stranger on her floor, at the storm still raging beyond the cabin walls. "We wait. We watch, and we keep that rifle loaded." The morning crept forward. Josie dozed sitting up, Bertie warm against her chest. The other children slept in a tangle near the fire. Sam still pressed against Silas's side. Clementine curled at the foot of the crib. Hattie in the rocking chair with the knife across her lap. Ezra was the only one awake. He stood over the stranger's saddlebags, which Hattie had dragged inside with the last of the supplies before bolting the door. Ezra had been watching those bags all night, the way he watched everything. Careful, suspicious, looking for the thing that would prove him right about not trusting. He unbuckled the first bag. Spare clothes, ammunition, a tin of coffee. Nothing wrong. He opened the second. His hand closed around a folded piece of paper. Heavy stock, official-looking, creased from being carried a long time. He unfolded it near the lamp and read the words printed in thick black letters above a sketch of a man's face. A face that matched the one sleeping 6 feet away on his mama's floor. Wanted, Silas Thorne, desertion and cowardice, $500 reward, by order of the United States Army. Ezra's hand found his knife. His breath came fast and shallow. He looked at his mother sleeping with Bertie against her chest. He looked at Sam curled trustingly against a wanted man's arm. He folded the poster and put it in his pocket. and he sat down in front of the door with a knife across his knees and waited for the stranger to wake up. Silas woke to the smell of coffee and the feeling of someone watching him. Not the casual awareness of another person in the room. This was sharper, targeted. The kind of attention that came with intent behind it. He opened his eyes and found Ezra Bellamy sitting 4 feet away with a knife across his knees and a look on his face that would have been dangerous on a man 3 times his age. "Morning," Silas said. Ezra didn't blink. "You move slow when you wake up. That's good. Means you're hurt worse than you're letting on. Means I can get to Mama before you can get to anyone." Silas studied the boy. The grip on that knife was wrong for fighting. Too tight, too high on the handle. But the position was right. Blocking the door. Back to the wall. Clear line of sight to every person in the cabin. Whoever had taught this child to think tactically had done a decent job of it. "You're smart," Silas said. "Your papa teach you to set up like that?" "Don't talk about my papa." "Fair enough." "I found something in your bags." The words landed in Silas's chest heavier than any fist. He didn't need to ask what. He'd been carrying that poster for 3 years, a reminder of what the world had decided he was. He should have burned it a long time ago. "I figured someone would find it eventually," Silas said. "Desertion and cowardice." Ezra's voice was low, controlled, but Silas could hear the tremor underneath. $500. That's more money than my papa made in 2 years of logging. "It is." "So you're a coward who ran from a fight." "That's what the paper says." "And you came into our house. You touched my baby sister. You told my mama what to do, and she listened because she was scared, and you sounded like you knew things." Ezra's jaw tightened. What kind of man does that? What kind of man crawls into a family's home and pretends to be good when he's got that in his bags? Silas pushed himself up against the fireplace stones. The stitches in his side pulled, and the pain hit him like a wall, but he didn't let it show. This boy deserved a man who could sit up and look him in the eye. "The kind who didn't plan to be here," Silas said. "The kind whose horse found your barn in a blizzard. I didn't choose this, son, but I'm not sorry it happened, because your sister is breathing this morning, and she wasn't going to make it through the night without help." "Don't call me son." "Wouldn't dream of it." Ezra reached into his pocket and pulled out the wanted poster, unfolding it with deliberate slowness. "I'm going to show this to my mama, and then you're leaving. Storm or no storm, stitches or no stitches, you're gone. That's your mama's decision to make, not yours. Everything in this family is my decision now." The boy's voice broke on the last word, just barely, just enough to reveal the exhaustion and terror that lived under all that hard-built armor. "Somebody's got to make them. Somebody's got to keep us safe, and it ain't going to be some stranger with a wanted poster in his bags and blood on my mama's floor." "Ezra," Josie's voice came from behind him. She stood in the doorway to the back room, Bertie sleeping against her shoulder, her face carrying the particular stillness of a woman who'd heard every word and was deciding what to do with them. Ezra held up the poster. "Mama, look." Josie crossed the room and took the paper from her son's hand. She read it twice. Silas watched her face and saw the exact moment the words registered. The slight narrowing of her eyes. The way her free hand pressed tighter against Bertie's back. The almost invisible step she took to put herself between him and the crib. "Desertion," she said. "Cowardice in the face of the enemy." "Yes, ma'am." "Is it true?" "The desertion part. I left my unit, walked away from my post or in a retreat." Silas held her gaze. "The cowardice part is a lie told by a man who needed someone to blame for his own failure." "But I can't prove that standing in your cabin with a hole in my side and a poster with my face on it. Then why should I believe you? You shouldn't. Not based on my word. Words are cheap. He nodded toward the back room, where he could hear Bertie's breathing. Still rough, but steady. Alive. But you heard your daughter breathe last night, and you heard me tell you what to do, and it worked. A coward doesn't learn the things I know. A coward runs from people who are suffering. He doesn't run toward them. Josie was quiet for a long time. Long enough for Sam to wake up and rub his eyes and say, "Mama, I'm hungry," and for Hattie to start moving around the kitchen the way she did every morning, stirring the fire and reaching for the oat tin. Long enough for Clementine to uncurl from her spot by the crib and drift toward the window, pressing her palm flat against the cold glass. "You got 2 days," Josie said, "until the storm breaks and you're healed enough to ride. You don't touch my children. You don't go through our things. You sleep where I can see you. And if I find out you lied about one single thing, Ezra's not the one you need to worry about." "Understood." "Mama," Ezra started. "I heard you, Ezra. I heard every word, and I'm proud of you for finding that poster, and I'm proud of you for standing guard all night. But I'm your mother, and this is my house, and I will make this call." Ezra's face went through 6 different expressions in 2 seconds. Then he stood up, shoved the knife back in his belt, and walked outside into the snow without putting on his coat. "He's angry," Silas said. "He's been angry for 2 years. That boy's been carrying this family on his back since the day we buried his father, and he's breaking under it. He just won't let anyone see." Josie shifted Bertie to her other shoulder. "Don't mistake my decision for trust, Mr. Thorne. I'm letting you stay because my baby needs whatever it is you know about keeping her lungs clear. The second she doesn't need you, you're gone." "Wouldn't expect anything different." Hattie set a bowl of oatmeal on the table, then turned and placed a second bowl on the floor beside Silas. "Not on the table. On the floor." Message delivered. "Thank you," Silas said. "Don't thank me." Hattie's eyes were cool and measured, older than her years by a decade. "I saw what you did for Bertie last night, and I won't pretend I'm not grateful. But grateful and trusting are 2 different animals, and I learned the difference the hard way." "From your father?" "From the man who promised my father the logging job was safe." She turned back to the stove. "Papa believed him. Papa's dead. You understand me, Mr. Thorne?" "Perfectly." The morning passed in careful distance. Josie tended Bertie while Silas talked her through the next steps from his place on the floor. More steam, less honey this time. Keep her upright as much as possible. Watch for the fever to spike again around midday. They spoke like 2 people handling something explosive, precise and deliberate, never saying more than necessary. Sam broke the tension the way only a 6-year-old could. He walked up to Silas with a bowl of melted snow and held it out with both hands. "For your face," Sam said. "You got cuts all over, and Mama says cuts need cleaning or they go bad." "Sam, leave him alone," Hattie called. "But his face is all messed up. He's going to scare Bertie when she wakes up." Silas took the bowl. "Much obliged, Sam. That's real thoughtful." "Mama says I'm the thoughtful one. Ezra's the tough one, and Hattie's the smart one, and Clem's the quiet one, and Bertie's the little one, and I'm the thoughtful one." Sam plopped down cross-legged on the floor. "What are you?" "The injured one, mostly." "No, I mean, what are you in your family? Everybody's got a thing in their family." Silas dabbed the cold water against the cuts on his face. The sting grounded him, pulled him out of the past that Sam's question had dragged dangerously close to the surface. "I was the oldest. Had a sister named Ruth, 3 years younger. She was the stubborn one." "Where is she?" "Ohio, last I heard." "That's real far from Montana." Don't you miss her? Every single day. Then why don't you go see her? Silas opened his mouth and closed it again. From the kitchen, he heard Josie's hands go still on the counter. She was listening. They were all listening, even Hattie, who'd stopped stirring the pot and stood with her back to him, but her shoulders tight with attention. Because sometimes a person makes choices that take them so far from home, they can't figure out how to get back, Silas said. Even when they want to. That's dumb, Sam said. You just walk. Or ride a horse. Mama says every road goes 2 directions. Your mama sounds like a wise woman. She's the best mama in Montana. She can shoot a rabbit from 50 yards and make biscuits that don't taste like rocks. Papa said those were the 2 most important things in a wife. Sam, Hattie said, go check on the chickens. It's snowing. Then go check on them fast. Sam looked at Silas with the universal expression of a youngest child who knows he's being sent away from the interesting part. I'll come back. I got more questions. I'll be here. Promise? The word hung in the air like a held breath. Silas saw Josie turn slightly, saw the warning in her eyes. Don't make promises to my children. I'll be here when you get back from the chickens, Silas said. That's all I can say for sure. Sam considered this, nodded like it was a fair enough deal, and headed for the door. He paused with his hand on the bolt. Mr. Silas? The poster Ezra found? Mama says desertion means you ran away from the army. That's right. Did you run because you were scared? No. Why'd you run then? Because staying meant letting people die who didn't have to. Sam thought about this with the ferocious seriousness only a 6-year-old could bring to a moral question. That sounds like the opposite of cowardice to me. And he went out into the snow. Josie let out a breath she'd been holding. She came to check Bertie's forehead and knelt close enough to Silas that he could smell the wood smoke in her hair and the mint on her hands from the steam treatments. He asks too many questions, she said. He asks the right ones. Most adults don't have that kind of courage. Don't confuse courage with not knowing better. Maybe not knowing better is where courage starts. She looked at him. Really looked. For the first time since reading the poster. You said last night that you know what it sounds like when someone's drowning from the inside. You said you'd heard it in men, women, children. That's not trapper talk. That's not hunter talk. No, ma'am. I'm not going to ask you again, but I need to know this much. Are my children safe with you in this cabin? Safer than they'd be without me, at least until that baby's lungs are clear. That's not what I asked. I have never in my life harmed a child, and I would die before I let harm come to yours. That's the truest thing I know how to say. Josie stood up. She didn't thank him or reassure him or tell him she believed him. She just went back to the kitchen and started heating more water for the steam tent. But she left the rifle leaning against the far wall instead of keeping it at her side. And Silas understood that was the closest thing to trust a woman like Josie Bellamy knew how to give. By afternoon, Bertie's fever had dropped enough for the baby to open her eyes and fuss for food instead of just crying. Josie nursed her while Hattie heated broth, and the cabin took on the cautious rhythm of a household learning to work around a stranger. Ezra came back from outside with split firewood stacked in his arms, enough for 2 days. He'd been chopping since morning, in the cold, without gloves. His hands were raw and cracked, and he wouldn't look at anyone when he dropped the wood by the stove. "Thank you, Ezra," Josie said. He grunted and sat in his chair by the door. "Your hands," Silas said. "There's a salve." "I don't need anything from you." "Suit yourself. But frostbitten fingers don't heal on their own, and a family that depends on a boy who can fix things Can't afford for that boy to lose feeling in his hands. Ezra's jaw worked. He stared at the fire. Then he stood, walked to Silas, and held out his hands, palms up, without a word. Silas examined them with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Gently turning each hand, checking the fingertips for color, pressing the nail beds to test circulation. Nothing permanent, but you need tallow in these tonight, and wrappings to keep the warmth in. And gloves next time. Gloves got a hole in them. I can fix that, Hattie said from the kitchen. If someone would actually tell me before they go out and freeze their hands off. I didn't freeze them off. Close enough. Hattie brought a jar of rendered tallow and set it beside Silas. You show me how to wrap them proper, and I'll remember for next time. Silas showed her. Hattie watched with the intense focus of someone cataloging information for survival, her quick hands mimicking his movements, asking sharp questions about pressure and circulation that told him she'd been the one patching this family together long before he arrived. You're good at this, Silas said. I'm good at everything that keeps my family alive. She finished wrapping Ezra's left hand and reached for his right. Mama can't do it all, even though she tries, so I do what I can. That's a heavy load for 13. Didn't ask for your opinion on my load, Mr. Thorne. No, ma'am, you surely didn't. Clementine had been watching the whole exchange from her spot by the window. She hadn't spoken. Silas was beginning to understand she didn't speak at all, or at least hadn't for a very long time. But she moved to the shelf where the family kept their mending supplies and brought back a pair of leather gloves with a tear along one thumb. She set them beside Silas without looking at him, then went back to her window. That's the most she's communicated with anyone outside this family in 2 years, Hattie said quietly. She stopped talking the day Papa died. Hasn't said a word since. Silas picked up the gloves and turned them over in his hands. Good leather, well made, just needing a simple repair. A father's gloves, brought to him by a daughter, who couldn't say what she meant, but found a way to say it anyway. I'll fix these tonight, he said. Nobody answered, but nobody objected either, and Silas understood that something had shifted in the cabin. Not trust, it was too early and too fragile for that word. But the air had changed. A door that had been barred was now just closed. And closed doors, unlike barred ones, could open from either side. The wind picked up that evening, driving snow sideways against the cabin walls, until the timber groaned. Josie fed the children and put the little ones to bed. Sam and Bertie first, then Clementine, who went to her pallet without being asked, and lay there with her eyes open, watching the firelight move across the ceiling. Hattie settled into the rocking chair with her mother's recipe journal, the blue cloth cover worn soft from years of handling, and began reading by lamplight. Ezra took his position by the door, knife on his knees, eyes on Silas. You can sleep, Silas told him. I ain't going anywhere. That's what I'm afraid of. Josie brought Silas clean water and fresh bandaging without being asked. She changed his dressing with the same steady hands that had stitched him the night before, her face close enough for him to see the exhaustion she wouldn't show her children. Bertie's breathing better, she said. She'll need the steam treatments for 3 more days at least, maybe 5. The congestion loosens in stages. Then I guess you're not leaving in 2 days after all. Guess not. She tied off the bandage and sat back. I lost my husband to a man's lies. A foreman who swore the timber was sound when he knew it wasn't. Robert took his word because that's who Robert was. He believed people meant what they said. She paused. I don't have that luxury anymore. I've got 5 children and 40 acres and a town full of people who think I should sell this land and move back east before winter kills us all. Are they wrong? About winter killing us? Maybe not. About selling? Her chin lifted. Robert Bellamy built this place with his own 2 hands. He's buried on that ridge out back. My children were born in this room. I'm not leaving. Nobody's asking you to. Virgil Crane is. The name came out flat, like something she'd been chewing on for months. Owns half the valley. Been after this land since before Robert died. Our creek is the only water source that don't freeze solid in winter. He's offered to buy 3 times. Last time he wasn't so polite about it. What'd he do? Sent his men to pull our fence posts. Said it was a surveying error. That 20 acres of our land was actually his. I rode into town with the deed and showed Judge Pruitt the property lines, and Crane backed off. She looked at the fire. But he'll try again. Men like Crane always try again. And next time, I might not have the right piece of paper to stop him. Silas listened to the wind testing the cabin walls and thought about men like Crane. He'd known plenty of them. Men who mistook wealth for authority and authority for right. Men who took what they wanted because nobody was strong enough to stop them. Men like Harrison, who'd sent him running into these very mountains. "How many men does Crane have?" he asked. 8, 10, depends on the season. And you've got what, an 11-year-old with a knife and a 13-year-old with a recipe book? I've got a rifle, and I don't miss. 1 rifle against 10 men. I didn't say I had a plan, Mr. Thorne. I said I wasn't leaving. Across the room, Ezra hadn't moved from his post by the door, but Silas noticed the boy's head had tilted slightly toward their conversation, his body angled to catch every word. Not just guarding, gathering intelligence. Planning. "Your boy's listening," Silas said quietly. "My boy's always listening. It's what keeps him up at night." Josie stood and wiped her hands on her apron. "Get some sleep, Mr. Thorne. Bertie will need another treatment before dawn, and you're no good to anyone if you pass out again." She walked to the back room and paused at the doorway. She didn't turn around, but her voice carried clearly in the quiet cabin. "You asked me if my children are safe with you. I notice you never said what you're running from, or who's chasing you." "No, ma'am, I didn't." "Whenever you're ready to tell me that story, I'll be ready to listen. But don't wait too long. Secrets have a way of coming out at the worst possible time in a place like this." She closed the door behind her. Silas lay still, listening to the storm batter the cabin, and the boy breathing by the door, and somewhere in the back room, a 3-year-old girl pulling air into her lungs, 1 steady breath at a time, because a stranger had known what to do when nobody else could help. He reached for the saddlebag beside him and pulled out a bundle of letters he'd been carrying for 6 years. His sister Ruth's handwriting on every envelope. Unopened. Every one. Ezra watched him hold the letters, but said nothing. The storm raged on outside, and inside the Bellamy cabin, 6 people who didn't trust each other settled into an uneasy silence that felt, against all logic and every instinct, like the first fragile thread of something none of them had expected to find. 4 days into the storm, Bertie sat up on her own and reached for Josie's braid. Her little fingers closed around it and pulled, and the sound Josie made, half laugh, half sob, brought every person in the cabin to their feet. "She's hungry," Hattie said, already reaching for the broth pot. "Mama, she's actually hungry." "I can see that." Josie's voice shook, but her hands were steady as she lifted Bertie from the crib. The baby fussed and squirmed and grabbed at everything within reach, alive in a way she hadn't been for nearly a week. The rattle in her chest had faded to a whisper. Her skin was cool. Her eyes were clear and furious with the indignation of a 3-year-old who'd been kept still for too long. Sam ran across the cabin and pressed his face against Bertie's leg. "She's better! Mr. Silas, she's better! You fixed her!" "Your mama fixed her," Silas said from the floor. He'd managed to sit up fully that morning, his back against the fireplace stones, color returning to a face that had been gray for days. "I just talked. She did the work." "That ain't true," Hattie said, spooning broth into a cup. She didn't look at him when she said it, but her voice had lost the edge it had carried since the first night. "And everybody in this room knows it." Ezra said nothing. He sat in his chair by the door, whittling a piece of kindling into nothing, his knife working in short, angry strokes. He'd kept his position every night since finding the poster. Hadn't let up once. But Silas noticed the boy's eyes tracked to Bertie now, watching his baby sister grab at the world with both hands. And something complicated moved behind that hard young face. "Ezra," Josie said, "come hold your sister so I can heat water." "I'm busy." "You're whittling a stick into sawdust. Come hold Bertie." He came. He took the baby, with the rough gentleness of a boy who'd been holding this particular child since the day she was born. Bertie grabbed his ear and yanked, and Ezra's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close enough. "Ow! Quit it, Bird." "Bah," Bertie said. "That ain't my name." "Bah, bah, bah." "She's saying your name," Sam announced. "She's saying Ezra. She's saying nonsense." "No, she's saying it. She just can't do the whole thing yet because she's little." Silas watched the exchange and felt something crack open in his chest that he'd kept sealed for 6 years. The sound of siblings arguing over a baby. The warmth of a room full of people who belonged to each other. He thought about Sarah, his Sarah, who'd been just Bertie's age when she'd learned to say his name, who'd called him "See-us" because she couldn't manage the L, who'd laughed every time he pretended not to know who she was talking to. "Mr. Thorne." Hattie stood over him with a fresh bandage and the jar of tallow. "Time to change the dressing. Mama says I should learn how, since I'll need to manage it after you leave." After you leave. The words were deliberate. A reminder that this arrangement had an expiration date. That every kindness came with a boundary drawn around it. "Pull the old wrapping first," Silas said. "Slow. If it sticks, wet it before you tug." Hattie worked with the focused precision he'd come to expect from her. Quick learner, steady hands, no wasted motion. She peeled back the bandage and studied the wound underneath with clinical interest instead of squeamishness. "It's closing clean," she said. "Your mama's stitching. Told you she had good hands." "She's got good everything. She just doesn't hear it often enough." Hattie applied fresh tallow to the wound and began rewrapping. "Can I ask you something?" "Depends on the question." "The poster says cowardice. Ezra says that means you ran from a fight. But last night, Bertie stopped breathing again, and you talked Mama through it so calm it was like you'd done it 100 times before." She tied off the bandage. "Cowards don't sound like you sounded. So either the poster's wrong, or cowardice means something different than what I think it does." "The poster's not wrong about what I did. I left my unit during a battle. That's desertion, plain and simple." "But why? Why'd you leave?" Silas was quiet for a moment. He could hear Josie in the kitchen, could feel her listening the way she always listened, without looking, without stopping her work, but missing nothing. "There were families trapped on the wrong side of a bridge," he said. "Women, children. My commanding officer said to leave them. Said the mission mattered more than a handful of settlers." "And you went back for them?" "I went back." "Did they live?" "Every one of them." "And the army punished you for it?" "The army needed someone to blame for a retreat that turned into a disaster. A surgeon who abandoned his post to rescue civilians made an easy target." Hattie finished the bandage and sat back. "A surgeon? So you are a doctor?" "Was." Mama suspected. She didn't say it, but I could tell by the way she watched you with Bertie. Like she was trying to figure out how a stranger knew more about medicine than our actual doctor. Dr. Finch was a good doctor once, I'd guess. Liquor takes things from a man the same way a river takes soil. Slow enough you don't notice until the foundation's gone. That's a kind way of saying he's useless. It's an honest way of saying he's hurting. Hattie looked at him for a long time. You know what I think, Mr. Thorne? I think you're the kind of man who sees broken things and can't stop himself from trying to fix them. And I think that's probably what got you in trouble in the first place. She took the old bandages to the fire and burned them without waiting for a response. The storm broke on the 5th day. Not all at once, but in pieces. The wind dying first, then the snow thinning, then a crack of blue sky opening above the peaks that made Sam shout and press both hands against the window. The world outside was buried in white. Drifts piled chest-high against the cabin walls. But the violence had passed. Trail to town should be passable by tomorrow, Josie said, standing at the door, reading the sky the way her husband had taught her. Day after at the latest. Good, Ezra said from his chair. Sooner the better. Josie didn't respond to that. She closed the door and turned to Silas. You're healing faster than I expected. Those stitches can come out in another week. I can take them out myself. I'm sure you can, but I put them in, so I'll take them out. She said it like a fact, not an invitation, but Silas heard what lived underneath it. A week meant staying. Staying meant something she wasn't ready to name. There's something I need to tell you, Silas said, before that trail opens and people start coming through. Josie sat down at the kitchen table. I've been waiting. You know the poster. You know I left my unit. What you don't know is who I left it for. He took a breath that pulled at his stitches. There was a man named Colonel James Harrison, commanded our regiment at Willow Creek. When the Confederate line broke through, Harrison panicked. He ordered a full retreat and told us to abandon the civilians who'd sheltered near the bridge. And you disobeyed. I went back across the bridge under fire, loaded those families onto wagons, and got them to safety. 12 people, including 4 children. By the time I made it to our fallback position, Harrison had already written his report. Said I deserted under fire. Said my cowardice caused the retreat. He needed a scapegoat, and a field surgeon who disobeyed a direct order was convenient. Couldn't you tell your side? To who? Harrison had the rank, the connections, and the paperwork. I had the word of a dozen terrified civilians who scattered to the 4 winds the moment they were safe. There was no trial, no hearing, just a warrant and a poster and a price on my head. Josie's hands lay flat on the table, still as stone. And Harrison? What happened to him? Last I heard, he's a congressman, building a reputation on a war record that's mostly fiction. The coward who left those families to die is sitting in Washington pretending to be a hero, while the man who saved them is sleeping on my floor with a hole in his side. That about covers it. She was quiet. Silas could hear Bertie babbling in the back room, Sam asking Hattie what was for supper, the fire popping in the stove. Normal sounds. Safe sounds. He'd forgotten what they felt like. I had a daughter, he said, and the words came out before he could stop them. Sarah. She was 4. My wife was Catherine. After the warrant, I ran. Told myself I was protecting them by staying away, that if the army couldn't find me through my family, they'd leave Catherine and Sarah alone. His voice went flat. Diphtheria took them both the following winter. I was 200 miles away, hiding in a cabin not much different from this one, while my wife and daughter died without a doctor in the house. Josie's breath caught, not loudly, but he heard it. I could have saved them. That's the thing I carry, not the war, Not the poster, not the running. I could have been there. I had the skill to save them, and I wasn't there because I was hiding from a lie. Mr. Thorne, Silas. My name is Silas. And I'm telling you this because you asked me if your children are safe with me. And I owe you the full truth of who I am. I'm a man who let his family die because he was too busy protecting himself. That's worse than anything on that poster. No. Josie's voice came sharp and sudden. No, it isn't. You didn't let them die. A disease killed them. And a corrupt officer stole your life and your name and your chance to be where you should have been. You're carrying guilt that belongs to someone else, and I won't sit here and watch you drown in it. Silas stared at her. You don't know me well enough to say that. I know you spent 5 hours on my floor with a hole in your ribs, talking my baby through the worst night of her life. I know you taught my daughter how to wrap frostbitten hands, and you didn't flinch when my son held a knife on you. I know you fixed my dead husband's gloves because a little girl who hasn't spoken in 2 years asked you to without using a single word. Josie's eyes burned. You want to tell me you're a coward? Tell it to someone who hasn't watched you work. Neither of them spoke for a long time. The cabin settled around them, full of the small sounds of children and fire and wind dying down outside. Mama! Clementine stood in the doorway to the back room. She'd been there long enough to have heard everything. Silas could tell by the way she held herself, that particular stillness of a child processing something too big. Josie turned. What is it, sweetheart? Clementine crossed the room in her silent way. She stopped in front of Silas and looked at him with those enormous dark eyes, and Silas felt the weight of her gaze like a physical thing. Judgment and assessment, and something else, something searching. She reached into the pocket of her dress and pulled out a small wooden figure. A bird, carved by hands that had loved the making of it, worn smooth by years of holding. She placed it in Silas's palm without ceremony, without explanation. And then she walked back to her corner by the window and sat down. That was Papa's, Hattie said softly from across the room. He carved it for her the day she was born. She hasn't let anyone else touch it since he died. Silas held the small wooden bird and felt the weight of it. Not in his hand, but somewhere deeper, in the place where he'd locked away everything that mattered, because mattering meant losing. Thank you, Clem, he said. She didn't look at him, but her hand lifted from her lap and pressed flat against the window glass. Her signal, he was learning, for feeling something too big for silence to contain. The trail opened 2 days later, and with it came Trouble, wearing a good coat and an easy smile. Josie saw the riders first, 2 men on fresh horses, moving up the trail at the unhurried pace of people who owned everything they surveyed. She recognized the lead rider before he was close enough to hail. Crane, she said, and the word dropped from her mouth like something bitter. Silas was on his feet by then, still sore, still careful with his left side, but steady enough to stand. The man who wants your land? And everything on it. Josie reached for the rifle. Hattie, take the children to the back room. Mama, I want to stay. Take them, now. Hattie obeyed, gathering Sam and Bertie and reaching for Clementine, who went rigid at the touch, but followed. Ezra didn't move. Ezra, Josie said, I'm staying. Josie looked at her son, at the knife in his belt, at the hard set of his jaw and the fear buried so deep under anger that most people would never see it. Fine, but you stand behind me, and you don't speak unless I tell you to. Virgil Crane rode up to the porch with the casual authority of a man who believed the world existed for his convenience. He was tall, silver-haired, with a kind of face that looked generous until you studied the eyes. Beside him rode a younger man, thick-necked and watchful, with a deputy's badge pinned to his coat. Mrs. Bellamy, Crane touched his hat. Glad to see you survived the storm. Whole town was worried about you and those young ones out here alone. We managed fine. I can see that. Crane's eyes moved past her to Silas, and something flickered across his face. Interest. Calculation. Didn't know you had company. Traveler got caught in the storm. He'll be moving on. Willie. Crane dismounted with the deliberate ease of a man making himself at home. Name's Virgil Crane. I own the ranch south of here. And you are? Passing through, Silas said. Funny. Most folks passing through have a name. Most folks passing through don't get asked for one at somebody else's front door. Crane's smile thinned. The deputy shifted in his saddle, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol in a way that was meant to be noticed. Mrs. Bellamy, I came to make you an offer. Crane pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. A generous one, given the circumstances. $300 for the homestead and all 40 acres. That's 50 more than last time. And I think we both know this land ain't worth more than that without a man to work it. This land is worth exactly what I say it's worth, Mr. Crane, and it ain't for sale. Ma'am, be reasonable. You've got 5 children, no husband, and a winter that near killed your youngest. How long before the next storm takes one you can't save? You don't get to use my children to scare me into selling. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm trying to help. A woman in your position, a woman in my position, built this homestead beside her husband and buried him on that ridge and kept 5 children alive through the worst winter this territory has seen. Josie's voice didn't rise, but it hardened until every word could have cut glass. I don't need your help, your money, or your opinion about what a woman in my position can and cannot do. Crane's eyes went cold. The mask of generosity dropped, and what showed underneath was the flat patience of a man who always got what he wanted, and simply hadn't decided yet how much force this particular acquisition would require. I'll leave the offer open, he said, but Mrs. Bellamy, you should know that the territorial surveyor will be coming through in the spring. There are questions about property lines in this valley, legitimate questions, and a woman without resources to hire a lawyer might find herself at a disadvantage when those questions get answered. Are you threatening me, Mr. Crane? I'm informing you. There's a difference. He mounted his horse and looked at Silas one more time. And I'd be careful about the company you keep. This territory isn't kind to people who harbor strangers with things to hide. They watched him ride away. Ezra's hand had been on his knife the entire time, his knuckles white, his breathing fast and controlled. He knows, the boy said, about the poster, about Mr. Thorne. He doesn't know anything yet, Josie said, but he will. Men like Crane make it their business to know everything about everyone, and they use it when the time is right. Silas stood in the doorway, watching Crane's figure shrink against the white landscape. He recognized the type. Different name, different territory, same breed as Harrison. Men who wrapped their cruelty in legality and called their theft generosity. I should leave, he said, before my being here makes your situation worse. Josie turned to him. Snow still clung to her hair from the wind that had blown through the open door. Her face held the particular exhaustion of a woman who'd been fighting alone so long she'd forgotten what reinforcement looked like. You fixin' to run again, Silas Thorne? I'm fixing to keep your family out of my mess. Your mess has been sitting in my cabin for a week, eating my food and saving my daughter's life. I think it's a little late to keep us out of it. Josie, don't. She held up one hand. Don't you dare use my name soft like that and then tell me you're leaving. I've had one man leave me already, and he didn't even get a choice about it. If you go, you go. But don't pretend it's for my sake. Ezra looked between them. Something shifted in the boy's face, not softening exactly, but a rearranging, as if the walls he'd built were being tested from the inside as well as the outside. "He's right, Mama," Ezra said. "If Crane finds out about that poster, he'll use it. He'll have the marshal here inside a day, and they'll drag Mr. Thorne out and probably charge you with harboring a fugitive." "I know that. So, what's the plan?" Josie looked at her son, at the man by the door, at the cabin her husband had built, the land he'd died for, the children who needed more than she could give them alone. "The plan is we stop running from everything. All of us." She picked up the rifle and set it by the door where it belonged. "The plan is we figure out how to fight." Fighting meant different things to different people in that cabin. For Josie, it meant riding into Elkhorn Creek the next morning with the deed to her land tucked inside her coat and a list of questions for anyone who'd answer them honestly. For Silas, it meant writing a letter he should have written 6 years ago. And for Ezra, it meant standing in the barn doorway, watching his mother ride away, and hating the fact that the man she'd left in charge was the same man whose wanted poster was still folded in his back pocket. "She trusts you," Ezra said without turning around. "She trusts that I'll keep you safe while she's gone. That's not the same thing." "Close enough." The boy kicked at a frozen clod of dirt. "What happens when Crane finds out who you are?" "He uses it. Same way men like him use everything. As leverage." "And what happens to us?" Silas heard the question underneath the question. Not what happens to this family in the legal sense, but what happens to the people I love because of you. He owed this boy an honest answer. "If Crane turns me in, they'll send a marshal. I'll be arrested. Your mother might face charges for harboring me, but more likely they'll just use the threat of charges to pressure her into selling. Crane gets the land, I get a cell, and your family gets pushed out." "So we lose everything." "Not if we move first." Ezra turned. "Move how?" "I wrote a letter this morning to a man named Tom Morrison, served with me during the war. He was there at Willow Creek Bridge. He saw what really happened, and I believe he's been carrying the guilt of staying silent ever since." Silas held up the sealed envelope. "If this letter reaches him, and if he's the man I think he still is, we won't need to run from that poster anymore." "And if he's not?" "Then I leave before Crane can use me against your mother. That's a promise." "You're making a lot of promises for a man with a bounty on his head." "I'm making the only promises I've got left." Ezra took the letter from Silas's hand, looked at the address, and put it in his coat. "I'll take it to the post office. Mama left me the mule." "Your mother told me to keep you here." "My mother told you to keep us safe. Getting that letter sent is the safest thing I can do for this family." The boy pulled on his father's repaired gloves, the ones Silas had stitched by firelight, and walked to the barn without looking back. "Besides, somebody's got to ride into town eventually. Might as well be someone who knows every back trail between here and Elkhorn Creek." Silas watched him go and felt something shift between them. Not trust, not yet, but the first grudging acknowledgement that they were fighting on the same side. Inside the cabin, the morning moved in the strange rhythm that had become familiar over the past week. Hattie managed the household with her usual quiet authority, feeding Birdie, directing Sam's energy toward useful tasks, keeping one eye on Clementine and the other on the window. She'd taken to reading her mother's recipe journal out loud while she worked, her voice filling the cabin with Martha Crawford Bellamy's careful instructions for living. "Mama Crawford says the best bread comes from patience and warm hands," Hattie read, stirring a pot of beans. "Says you can't rush the rising any more than you can rush the healing. Both take exactly as long as they take." "Smart woman," Silas said. "The smartest. She could look at a sick cow and tell you what it ate, what it drank, and where it slept wrong. Papa said she should have been a doctor. Maybe she was, just a different kind. Hattie set down the spoon and turned to face him. I heard what you told Mama last night. About your daughter. About your wife. I figured. Sarah, that was her name? Sarah Catherine Thorne had her mother's eyes and my stubbornness. And you think if you'd been there, you could have saved them? I know I could have. Diphtheria is treatable if you catch it early. Steam, fluids, keeping the airway clear. Same things we did for Birdie. His voice dropped. I had the knowledge. I just wasn't in the room. Hattie was quiet for a long time. When she spoke, her voice held a steadiness that reminded him so much of Josie, it made his chest ache. Papa was in the room when the tree fell. He was right there, 10 feet from where the trunk split. All the knowledge in the world wouldn't have saved him. Because sometimes the thing that kills you doesn't care what you know or how ready you are. She picked up the spoon again. You carry your guilt because you think you had a choice. Maybe you did. But guilt is a hungry thing, Mr. Thorne. Feed it long enough, and it eats everything else. Sam burst through the back door, dragging a chicken that had escaped the coop. Hattie, Margaret's out again, and she tried to eat my boot. Samuel Robert Bellamy, if you don't stop naming those chickens, she already knows her name. Watch. Margaret! Margaret! The chickens squawked and flapped, and Sam held on with both hands, his face bright with the pure joy of a 6-year-old doing battle with a bird. See, she answered. She's trying to get away from you. That's how chickens say hello. Silas laughed. The sound surprised him so much, he stopped. He couldn't remember the last time he'd laughed. Actually laughed. Not the bitter exhale that passed for humor in a life lived alone. Sam looked at him with delighted triumph. See, Mr. Silas thinks it's funny. Mr. Silas thinks you're going to lose a finger if that hen gets hold of you. Put her back. Sam hauled the chicken toward the back door, chattering to it the whole way. In the quiet that followed, Clementine crossed the room and sat down near Silas. Not next to him, near him, maintaining the careful distance she kept from everyone. She held her father's wooden bird in one hand and a piece of charcoal in the other. She began to draw on the hearthstone, small, careful marks that gradually took shape under her fingers. A cabin, a horse, 5 small figures standing in a row, and beside them a 6th figure, taller than the rest, drawn with the same careful attention she gave to the others. Silas watched her work and said nothing. Some things didn't need words. Some things were better without them. Josie returned from town with a face like a closed fist. She dismounted, handed the horse's reins to Hattie, and walked straight past Silas into the cabin without speaking. He heard her set the rifle down, heard the scrape of a chair, heard the particular silence of someone deciding how much to say. He gave her 5 minutes. Then he went inside. Happened? Crane's already been to Judge Pruitt, filed a formal challenge to our property lines. Says he's got a surveyor coming from Helena in 2 weeks to remark the boundaries. She stared at the coffee. He's also been talking, telling people I've got a drifter living in my cabin, a strange man around my children. Agnes Whitfield stopped me outside the general store and told me half the town thinks I've lost my mind. What did Agnes say exactly? That a respectable widow doesn't invite strange men to sleep under her roof. That if I can't manage this homestead on my own, the Christian thing to do would be to find those children a proper home with a proper family. Josie's jaw tightened. A proper family. As if the one they've got isn't good enough because it's missing a father. Crane's poisoning the well, turning the town against you before the surveyor even arrives. And it's working. I could see it in their faces. Even folks who've known me for years, they looked at me different today. like I'd done something shameful. You saved your daughter's life. I let a stranger into my house. In this territory, for a woman alone, that's enough. The back door opened, and Ezra came in, stamping snow off his boots. His face was flushed from the cold ride, and he went straight to his mother. Letters sent, and I heard things in town. What things? Crane's deputy, the one who rode out here with him? His name's Wyatt Polk. He was in the saloon talking loud about a reward poster for a deserter. Said he'd heard there might be one hiding in the valley, and that any citizen who turned in a fugitive would earn the territorial government's gratitude. Josie looked at Silas. He knows. He suspects. There's a difference. But it won't stay a difference for long. We need time. Josie stood and paced the small kitchen, her mind working through options the way Silas had seen commanders work through battle plans. The surveyor doesn't come for 2 weeks. If we can hold Crane off until then, we can challenge his claim publicly. But we need the original survey documents, the ones filed when Robert claimed this land. Where are they? Territorial Records Office in Helena. Robert filed them himself in 1871. But Helena's a 4-day ride in good weather, and this time of year. I'll go. Josie stopped pacing. You'll go. The man with a wanted poster and a hole in his side is going to ride 4 days through mountain passes in winter? I'm the only one who can. You can't leave 5 children. Ezra's too young to make that ride alone. And those documents are your only proof that Crane's claim is fraudulent. If someone recognizes you, then I'll deal with it. But right now, your land is more important than my freedom. Don't say that. Don't you dare rank yourself below a piece of dirt. It's not about dirt, Josie. It's about your children having a home. It's about Bertie growing up where her father built something. It's about Clementine drawing pictures on a hearthstone that belongs to her family. He stepped closer. I've spent 6 years protecting nothing but myself. Let me protect something that matters. The cabin went quiet. Hattie stood in the doorway to the back room, Bertie on her hip, listening. Ezra leaned against the wall with his arms crossed, and Clementine sat by the fire, her charcoal drawing complete, 6 figures standing together in front of a cabin that could have been this one. You come back, Josie said. You get those documents and you come back. That's not a request, Silas. That's the price of going. I'll come back. You said you don't make promises you can't keep. Then I'll keep this one. He left before dawn the next morning. Josie had packed his saddlebags with food she couldn't spare, bandages she might need, and a jar of the tallow salve that Hattie had been using on his wound. No one said goodbye. Hattie nodded from the kitchen. Sam hugged his leg and said, "Bring back candy." And Josie told him that was inappropriate, and Sam said, candy was never inappropriate. Clementine pressed something into his hand as he passed her. A folded piece of paper. He didn't look at it until he was a mile from the cabin, the horse picking her way through drifts that came up past her knees. When he unfolded it, he found her drawing. The 6 figures, the cabin, the horse. And underneath, in a child's shaky handwriting, the first words Clementine Bellamy had written in 2 years. Come home. He folded the paper and put it in his breast pocket next to his sister Ruth's unopened letters, and rode toward Helena with something burning in his chest that he recognized as the thing he'd stopped believing in the day they'd put his wife and daughter in the ground. Ezra watched from the barn until the rider disappeared over the ridge. Then he went inside and bolted the door and took his position in the chair with his knife across his knees. But this time, the knife was pointed at the door, not at the place where Silas had slept. 3 days passed. Josie ran the homestead the way she'd always run it, by force of will and the refusal to stop moving. She milked the cow, fed the chickens, chopped wood when Ezra's hands were too raw to grip the axe, and sat up at night with the rifle across her knees, watching the trail for riders who might mean harm. On the fourth morning, Crane came back. This time he brought 4 men. They rode up to the cabin in a loose formation that spoke of practice, spreading out to cover the approaches. Crane dismounted and walked to the porch with a paper in his hand and the deputy at his shoulder. "Mrs. Bellamy, I've got a court order from Judge Pruitt. Temporary injunction against use of the disputed acreage pending the surveyor's review." He held out the paper. "Means you can't work, plant, graze, or draw water from the 20 acres in question." Josie took the paper and read it. Her hands didn't shake, but Ezra could see the muscles in her jaw working. "The 20 acres in question include our water source, Mr. Crane. You know that." "I know the law is the law, ma'am. And the law says that land is under dispute." "The law says whatever you paid Judge Pruitt to say." Crane's expression didn't change. "Careful, Mrs. Bellamy. Accusing a judge of corruption is a serious matter. Almost as serious as harboring a fugitive from military justice." The words landed like a slap. Josie felt Ezra move behind her, felt his hand find the doorframe, felt him ready himself the way he always readied himself. Too fast, too fierce, too young. "I don't know what you're talking about," Josie said. "I think you do. Wyatt here's been in contact with the Territorial Marshal's office. Seems there's a reward out for a man named Silas Thorne. Army deserter. $500. Crane looked past her into the cabin. "He wouldn't happen to still be here, would he?" "There's nobody here but me and my children." "Is that so?" Crane nodded to the deputy. "Wyatt, why don't you have a look around?" "You are not entering my home." "Ma'am, I've got a deputy with a badge and a reasonable suspicion that you're harboring a wanted man. The law gives him the right to search." Ezra stepped out from behind his mother. "And I've got a rifle that says he doesn't." Every man in the yard went still. The boy stood on the porch with Robert Bellamy's hunting rifle leveled at Wyatt Polk's chest. His hands were steady. His face held the terrible calm of someone who'd already decided this was the hill he'd die on. "Ezra," Josie breathed, "put that down." "No, Mama." "Ezra, James." "They're not coming in our house. They're not taking our water. And they're not touching anything Papa built." The rifle didn't waver. "I'm 11 years old, and I've been the man of this house for 2 years, and I am done letting people take things from us." Crane held up a hand, keeping his men back. "Son, you don't want to do this. I ain't your son, and you don't know the first thing about what I want." "Ezra." Josie's voice changed, dropped into something low and fierce that only her children had ever heard. "Lower that rifle, right now. Not because they're right, but because you are better than this. Your papa didn't raise a boy who shoots men on his front porch. He raised a boy who finds another way." The rifle stayed up. Ezra's breath came fast, his eyes bright with fury and fear, and the desperate need to do something, anything, to protect the people he loved. "There's another way," Josie said. "There's always another way. Trust me." Slowly, inch by inch, Ezra lowered the rifle. His whole body shook with the effort of standing down when every fiber wanted to fight. Crane smiled. "Smart boy. Now, Mrs. Bellamy, about that search." "That won't be necessary." A new voice came from the trail. Everyone turned. A rider approached at an easy pace, his bearing straight, and his clothes marking him as someone accustomed to authority. Behind him rode a second man, younger, carrying a leather case that looked official. "I'm Thomas Harding," the first man said, dismounting. "Attorney at law, retained by Mrs. Josephine Bellamy, through written request filed with my office in Helena 3 days ago." Josie blinked. She hadn't retained any attorney, Harding continued, his voice carrying the quiet power of someone who'd argued law in rooms far more intimidating than a snow-covered porch. I've reviewed the injunction you're attempting to serve, Mr. Crane, and I'm prepared to challenge it on the grounds that the original survey documents, which my associate here collected from the Territorial Records Office yesterday, clearly establish Mrs. Bellamy's property lines as filed by her late husband in 1871. There is no dispute. There has never been a dispute. And any further attempt to claim otherwise will be met with a countersuit for harassment, fraud, and abuse of legal process. Crane's face went the color of old snow. Who hired you? My client's identity is privileged. What isn't privileged is this. Harding pulled a second document from his coat. A formal complaint filed with the Territorial Governor's Office regarding Judge Pruitt's issuance of an injunction without proper review of existing survey records. The governor takes a dim view of judges who sign papers without reading them, Mr. Crane, as does the federal bench. The deputy's hand moved away from his pistol. Crane's men exchanged glances. The math was changing, and everyone on that porch could feel it. This isn't over, Crane said. Actually, Mr. Crane, regarding the property dispute, it very much is. Harding folded his arms. Now, I suggest you and your men leave Mrs. Bellamy's land before I add trespassing to the complaint. Crane mounted his horse. He looked at Josie with an expression that promised this was far from finished, that men with his resources didn't lose to widows and hired lawyers. But he left. His men followed, and the sound of their horses faded down the valley until the only noise was the wind, and Bertie fussing in the back room, and Ezra's ragged breathing as he finally let go of the rifle. Josie turned to the attorney. I didn't hire you. No, ma'am. But a man named Silas Thorne rode into my office 4 days ago, half frozen, bleeding through his coat, and told me a woman in Elkhorn Creek was about to lose her home because a rich man wanted her water rights. Harding reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He also asked me to deliver this. Josie took the envelope. Her name was written on the front in a hand she'd come to know over firelight conversations and steam tent vigils and the longest night of her daughter's life. She didn't open it in front of the attorney. She didn't open it in front of her children. She waited until Harding had gone and the cabin was quiet and Bertie was asleep and Sam was building something impossible out of kindling and Clementine was drawing on the hearthstone and Hattie was reading the recipe journal and Ezra was sitting in his chair with the rifle across his knees, but his eyes, for the first time in weeks, looking less like a soldier's and more like a boy's. She opened the letter in the light of the kitchen lamp and read the 3 lines Silas Thorne had written. The documents are real. The lawyer is paid through spring. I'm coming back, but if I don't, know that your family gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. A reason to stop running. Josie folded the letter and pressed it flat against her chest, right over the place where her heart had been locked up tight for 2 years. Mama? Ezra was watching her. Is he coming back? He says he is. Do you believe him? Josie looked at her son, this fierce, frightened, stubborn boy who'd held a rifle on 4 men to protect his family, who'd carried a wanted man's letter to the post office because it was the right thing to do, who'd spent 2 years building walls against the world and was only now beginning to wonder if walls were the answer. I do, she said. Ezra nodded once. Then he pulled his father's gloves from his coat, the ones Silas had repaired, and set them on the table where the stranger could find them when he returned. Outside, the Montana sky had cleared for the first time in weeks. Stars burned cold and bright above the peaks, and somewhere on the trail between Helena and Elkhorn Creek, a man who'd spent 6 years running toward nothing was finally riding toward something. A cabin with a fire in the stove, and 5 children who'd cracked him open in ways he hadn't known were possible, and a woman who told him not to use her name soft unless he meant it. He meant it. God help him, he meant every syllable. Silas rode into the Bellamy homestead on the 8th day, not the 4th. The horse came first, the way she had the night everything started, picking her way through crusted snow with the stubborn patience of an animal that knew where home was before her rider did. Josie saw them from the window and set down the rifle she'd been carrying to the door every morning since he'd left. She didn't run outside. She didn't call the children. She stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the table Robert had built and let herself breathe for what felt like the first time in a week. Hattie looked up from the stove. "He's back." "I can see that." "You going out there?" "In a minute." "Mama, go!" Josie grabbed her coat and stepped onto the porch. Silas was dismounting slow, favoring his left side worse than when he'd left. His face was thinner. His coat had a fresh tear along the shoulder. But he was upright, and he was here. And when he looked at her across the snow-covered yard, his eyes held something she hadn't seen in them before. Not just relief. Certainty. "You're late," she said. "Got delayed." 4 days delayed? The kind of delay that involves federal marshals and a congressman who doesn't want the truth getting out. He tied the horse and reached into his saddlebag. "But I brought something back besides the lawyer." He held up a leather folder, thick with papers. "Tom Morrison, my old sergeant. He wrote back before I even made it to Helena. Been carrying evidence of what really happened at Willow Creek for 12 years, waiting for someone to finally ask for it. Witness statements, his own sworn testimony, Harrison's original battle report, with the discrepancies marked." Silas's hand shook slightly as he held the folder. "It's all here, Josie. Everything I need to clear my name." Josie looked at the folder, then at the man holding it. "Come inside. You look like you're about to fall over." "I've been falling over for 8 days. Haven't hit the ground yet." "Don't start now. I just swept." Sam hit him at knee level before he made it through the door. The boy had been watching from the window and launched himself off the porch with the full body commitment of a 6-year-old who hadn't yet learned to hold anything back. "You came back! Hattie said you might not, but I said you would because you promised, and Mama says Bellamy's keep promises, and you're almost a Bellamy now because you live here." "Sam, let him breathe," Hattie said from the kitchen. But she was smiling. Actually smiling, for the first time since Silas had known her. And it changed her whole face, from 13 going on 40, back to the girl she was supposed to be. "I don't live here," Silas said, setting Sam down gently. "I'm just—" "If you say, 'passing through,' I will hit you with this spoon," Hattie said. Bertie sat on a blanket near the fire, chewing on a wooden block with the fierce determination of a child making up for lost time. She looked up when Silas entered and held out both arms. Not for Josie, not for Hattie, for him. "Bah!" Bertie said. "She's been saying that all week," Hattie said. "Sam told her it means your name." "It doesn't mean his name," Ezra said from his chair by the door. But he'd stood when Silas walked in, and the knife was on the table, not across his knees. "It means whatever babies mean when they say things. Don't read into it." "Ezra," Silas nodded at the boy, "thank you for getting that letter sent. Made all the difference." Ezra shrugged, but something loosened around his mouth. "I didn't do it for you. I did it for Mama." "I know. That's what makes it matter." Clementine appeared from the back room. She walked straight to Silas, reached into his coat pocket, and pulled out the folded drawing she'd given him. She unfolded it, studied it, then looked at him with an expression that asked a question she still couldn't put into words. "I kept it with me the whole way," Silas said, "right next to my heart." Clem took the drawing back, carried it to the shelf beside her father's Bible, and pinned it to the wall, where it could be seen from every corner of the cabin. Then she sat in her spot by the window and pressed her palm flat against the glass. "I think that means you passed inspection," Hattie said. That evening, after the children were fed and the fire was banked, and Bertie had fallen asleep clutching Silas's thumb because he'd made the mistake of letting her grab it and she wouldn't let go, Josie sat across the table from him and read Morrison's evidence, page by page. "This is enough," she said when she finished. "This is more than enough." Morrison thinks so too. He's already contacted a federal judge in Cheyenne, man named Worthington, got a reputation for integrity. Morrison says Worthington has agreed to review the case personally. And Harrison? Harrison's people know something's coming. That's why I was delayed. 2 men picked up my trail outside of Helena. Hired guns, same breed as the ones Crane keeps around. Josie's face went still. "They found you?" "They found me. I lost them in the passes north of Butte. But Josie, this connects. Crane's deputy, Wyatt Polk. Morrison recognized the name. Polk served under Harrison during the war. They're not separate problems. Crane and Harrison are connected." "Crane's doing Harrison's work in this valley." "Has been for years, I'd guess. Getting land, getting power, building a base for whatever Harrison's planning next. Your homestead just happened to be in the way." "Robert's homestead." Her voice caught on his name, the way it always did. But this time she didn't pull back from it. "He picked this land because of the water. Said whoever controlled the creek controlled the whole valley. Crane knew that too." "Your husband was a smart man." "My husband was a good man. There's a difference. Smart men protect themselves. Good men protect everyone else." She looked at him across the table. "You remind me of him in that way. It's the thing I like least about you. Because it's dangerous. Because it's the kind of thing that gets people killed." She reached across the table and touched the back of his hand. First time she'd touched him voluntarily, not to check a wound or change a bandage, but just to touch. "Don't get killed, Silas. These children can't lose another person." "I'm not planning on it." Robert wasn't planning on it either. He turned his hand over and closed his fingers around hers. "I'm not Robert. I've spent 6 years learning how to survive things that should have killed me. And I've got something to come back to now that I didn't have before." Josie didn't pull her hand away. They sat like that in the lamplight, while the cabin settled around them, and 5 children slept, and the Montana winter pressed against the walls like a living thing, testing every crack, finding none wide enough to get through. The reckoning came 12 days later, on a morning so cold the air itself seemed to crack. Josie was hanging laundry on the indoor line when Ezra burst through the door, breathing hard, his face white. "Riders, Mama, 8 of them, coming up the valley trail, fast." Silas was on his feet before the boy finished speaking. "Crane?" "Crane's in front, and Polk, and men I've never seen before. They're armed, Mama, all of them." Josie moved without hesitation. "Hattie, children to the root cellar, now." "Mama, I'm not hiding." "Hattie Mae, take your brothers and sisters underground, and you do not come out until I come get you. Do you hear me?" Hattie heard. She gathered Sam, who was scared and quiet for once. She picked up Bertie, who fussed at being moved. She reached for Clementine, who wouldn't budge. "Clem, come on," Hattie urged. Clementine stood at the window, her palm flat against the glass, watching the riders approach. She didn't move. "Clem!" The girl turned and looked at Silas. Then she walked to the shelf, took down her father's carved bird, and pressed it into Hattie's hand instead of Silas's. She pointed at the root cellar, then pointed at herself, then shook her head. "She wants to stay," Hattie translated. "Absolutely not," Josie said. Clementine looked at her mother with those deep, dark eyes and held up both hands, finger spread. 10. Then she pointed at Josie and held up one finger. 1. Then she pointed at Silas. 2. Then at Ezra. 3. Then at herself. 4. She's counting fighters, Ezra said. She's 8 years old. She's saying we need everyone. Ezra's voice was rough. And she's right. Josie closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, the mother was still there, but so was the woman who'd kept 5 children alive through a Montana winter, with nothing but grit and a dead man's rifle. Clem stays at the back window. She watches, and she does not move from that spot. Ezra, you're with me on the porch. Silas, I'll be where I need to be. Crane rode up with the confidence of a man who'd brought overwhelming force to settle a small problem. Polk flanked him on one side. On the other rode a man Silas recognized from the trail outside Helena, one of the hired guns who'd followed him through the mountain passes. Behind them came 5 more men, spread in the practiced formation of people who did this kind of work regularly. Mrs. Bellamy, Crane called. I've come with the Territorial Marshal's authority to search your property for a wanted fugitive. Step aside and nobody gets hurt. Show me the warrant, Josie said. Crane held up a paper. Signed by Judge Pruitt this morning. Judge Pruitt's warrants aren't worth the paper they're printed on, and you know it. Josie didn't move from the porch. Your pet judge is already under investigation by the territorial governor. Any warrant he signs is invalid pending review. That's for lawyers to sort out. Right now, I've got a legal document and 8 men. And you've got a porch. She's also got me. Silas stepped out of the cabin and stood beside Josie. And I'm the man you're looking for, so you can stop pretending this is about law enforcement. Crane's eyes locked onto him. Silas Thorne, deserter, coward. $500 on your head. Surgeon, soldier, man who saved 12 civilians, while your friend Harrison ran from a fight. Silas held up Morrison's leather folder. And I've got the proof. The yard went quiet. Polk's hand moved toward his weapon. Crane's men shifted in their saddles. Whatever papers you've got don't change the warrant, Crane said. Polk, take him. Polk dismounted and started toward the porch. Ezra stepped forward with the rifle raised. I wouldn't, the boy said. Son, put that down before somebody gets hurt. Last man who called me son on this porch didn't like how it ended. Try again. Ezra. Josie put her hand on the rifle barrel, not pushing it down, but steadying it, steadying him. Hold. From the back of the cabin came a sound that stopped everyone cold. A voice, high and clear and cracked with disuse, like a gate opening for the first time in years. They're coming! Clementine, speaking, screaming actually, with all the force of 2 years of silence breaking at once. Mama! More riders! From the north! Lots of them! Josie spun toward the back window. Silas moved to the side of the cabin and looked north. Dust and snow rose from the trail that led to town, and through it came a column of riders, not 8, but at least 15, moving with purpose. Crane saw them too. His confidence cracked. The lead rider broke free of the column and rode straight for the cabin. It was Agnes Whitfield, the woman who ran the town's only eating house, mounted on a draft horse too big for her, and riding it like she'd been born in the saddle. Behind her came men and women Josie recognized, shopkeepers, ranchers, the blacksmith, the schoolteacher, families she'd known for years who'd looked away when Crane started tightening his grip on the valley. Morning, Virgil, Agnes called, pulling up her horse with an authority that dwarfed Crane's staged entrance. Heard you were planning a visit to the Bellamy place. Thought you could use some company. This is official business, Agnes. It doesn't concern you. Everything that happens in this valley concerns me. I feed half the people in it. Agnes looked at Josie on the porch, and something passed between them. An apology, maybe, for the weeks of gossip and sideways looks. I also got a visit yesterday from a federal judge named Worthington, who had some very interesting things to say about you, Virgil. About your connection to a congressman named Harrison. About land fraud and intimidation and a 12-year conspiracy to silence the man standing on that porch. Crane's face went gray. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you won't mind waiting right here while Judge Worthington arrives. He's about an hour behind us. Took the main road on account of his age and dignity. Agnes smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. We took the shortcut because we didn't want to miss the show. The hour that followed was the longest of Josie's life and the shortest of Silas's. Crane tried to leave twice and was blocked both times by townspeople who'd found their courage in numbers. Polk surrendered his badge without a fight when the blacksmith, a man named Garrett, who stood 6'4" and weighed 250, suggested it would be healthier to cooperate. The hired guns melted away into the mountains the way hired guns do when the odds shift against them. Judge Worthington arrived on a gray mare with the unhurried dignity of a man who'd spent 50 years serving justice and saw no reason to rush it. He was accompanied by Tom Morrison, who rode beside him with a leather case full of evidence and the expression of a man who'd finally set down a burden he'd been carrying for over a decade. "Silas," Morrison said, dismounting. "Tom." They looked at each other across 12 years of silence and guilt, and the particular bond of men who'd seen the worst of war together. "I should have spoken up sooner," Morrison said. "You're speaking now. That's what counts." Judge Worthington conducted his review right there in the Bellamy yard, with the town as witness. He examined Morrison's evidence. He took statements from Silas and from Crane's own men, two of whom turned cooperative when they understood the scale of what they'd been part of. He reviewed the property documents that Harding had secured and compared them to Crane's fraudulent claims. By mid-afternoon, it was over. Crane was in custody along with Polk. Judge Pruitt's warrants had been voided, and Silas Thorne's name, the name that had been synonymous with cowardice and desertion for 12 years, was cleared. "Mr. Thorne," Judge Worthington said, folding his papers with the care of a man who understood the weight of what he'd just done. "On behalf of the territorial court, and, I expect, soon the federal government, I owe you an apology. What was done to you was a miscarriage of justice, and the men responsible will answer for it." "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me. Thank the woman who kept you alive long enough to see this day." The judge looked at Josie with open admiration. "And the children who gave you a reason to stop running." Agnes Whitfield approached Josie after the judge had finished. The older woman stood on the porch where Crane had stood hours earlier, but everything about her bearing was different. Smaller. Humbler. "I said things," Agnes began, "in town, about you and the children and the stranger in your cabin. Things that weren't fair and weren't true and weren't any of my business." "No, they weren't." "I'm sorry, Josie. Robert would have been ashamed of me, and he'd have been right." "Robert would have told you that people make mistakes, and the ones who own them are the ones worth keeping." Josie paused. "He also would have said you make the best chicken and dumplings in the territory, and that covers a lot of sins." Agnes laughed, a wet, surprised sound, and pulled Josie into a hug that lasted longer than either of them expected. The town left as the sun dropped behind the peaks, their horses filing back down the valley trail, their voices carrying in the cold air with a particular warmth of people who'd done something right together and knew it. Morrison stayed for supper at Hattie's insistence, eating 2 bowls of stew and pronouncing it the finest meal he'd had since leaving the army. "Your mama teach you to cook like that?" Morrison asked. "My mama taught me to cook. I taught myself to cook like that." Hattie set a 3rd bowl in front of him. "You want more?" You say please. Please, ma'am. Better. After Morrison left for town, promising to return in the morning with more details about the federal case against Harrison, the cabin settled into a quiet that felt different from every quiet that had come before. Not the careful silence of strangers, not the tense watchfulness of a family under siege. This was the deep, bone-level peace of people who'd been through something together and come out the other side. Bertie slept in the crib, breathing clean and deep. Sam had passed out on the floor near the fire, his wooden horse clutched in one hand, exhausted by the day's excitement. Hattie sat in the rocking chair with her mother's recipe journal, reading by lamplight, her face soft and young. And Clementine sat at the kitchen table with a fresh piece of charcoal and a clean sheet of paper, drawing something she wouldn't let anyone see yet. Ezra stood by the door. His knife was on the table. The rifle hung on its rack. His hands were in his pockets, and he was looking at Silas with an expression that had been building for weeks. "I owe you something," the boy said. "You don't owe me anything." "I owe you an apology. I treated you like a criminal from the minute I found that poster. Sat up every night watching you, waiting for you to prove me right about being dangerous." "You were protecting your family. That's never something to apologize for." "Maybe, but I was also scared." Ezra's voice dropped. "Scared that if I let myself trust you and you turned out wrong, it'd break something in this family that I couldn't fix. Same way Papa dying broke something." Silas waited. Some words needed room to land. "You're not Papa," Ezra said. "I don't want you to be Papa. Nobody can be that." "I know. But we need someone." The boy's jaw worked. "I need someone. I'm 11 years old, and I've been acting like I'm 40, and I'm tired, Mr. Thorne. I'm so tired I can't sleep at night, because if I close my eyes, I'm afraid something will happen and I won't be awake to stop it." Silas crossed the room and knelt in front of the boy, eye level, man to man, but also adult to child, in the way Ezra needed and had been refusing for 2 years. "You did a man's job, Ezra. Better than most men could have done it. But you're a boy, and boys deserve to sleep at night. So here's what I'm going to offer you, and you can take it or leave it." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "I'll watch the door, every night. You sleep, and if something comes, I'll wake you, and we'll handle it together. Not because you can't do it alone, because you shouldn't have to." Ezra didn't cry. He was too much his father's son for that. But he leaned forward, just slightly, just enough for his forehead to rest against Silas's shoulder, and he stayed there for 3 breaths before pulling back and wiping his face with the back of his hand. "Deal," Ezra said. "Deal." Josie watched from the kitchen doorway. She didn't interrupt. Some things between a man and a boy were sacred, and she understood that what she'd just witnessed was as close to holy as anything that had ever happened in this cabin. Later, after the children slept, all of them, including Ezra, who'd surrendered to exhaustion in his bed instead of his chair, Josie and Silas sat at the kitchen table with the lamp burning low between them. "Ruth wrote you back," Josie said, nodding toward the bundle of letters he'd finally placed on the shelf beside Martha's recipe journal. "I saw the new envelope." "Came with Morrison," Silas touched the letter. "She wants me to come home. Bring the whole family, she says. Ohio's got good farmland, and Emma needs an uncle, and Ruth needs her brother." "What did you tell her?" "I told her I'd found something in Montana that I wasn't ready to leave." "Something." "Someone." He looked at her. "Several someones." Josie reached across the table. She took his hand the way she'd taken it before, deliberate, eyes open, knowing exactly what she was doing and what it meant. "Robert's been gone 2 years," she said, "and I've spent every day of those 2 years proving I didn't need anyone, proving I could do it alone, carry it alone, be enough for 5 children and 40 acres and a world that thought a woman without a husband was a woman without worth. You are enough. You've always been enough. I know that. But enough isn't the same as whole. She tightened her fingers around his. You asked me once if my children were safe with you. I need to ask you something harder. Are you safe with us? Because these children will love you, Silas. They're already halfway there. And if you leave, I'm not leaving. Let me finish. If you leave, it won't just hurt them. It'll hurt me. And I've spent 2 years making sure nothing could hurt me again. So if you stay for real. Not passing through. Not until the road calls. For real. Josie Bellamy, I rode 8 days through a Montana winter with a hole in my side to bring a lawyer to your doorstep. I let an 11-year-old hold a knife on me for a week. I slept on your floor, ate off your floor, bled on your floor. I have been yours since the night you stitched me together barefoot in the snow, and the only reason I haven't said so is because I was waiting for you to believe you deserved to hear it. She stood. She came around the table. She put her hands on his face and looked at him the way she looked at everything that mattered. Steady, fearless, complete. Then stay. Yes, ma'am. She kissed him. Not the desperate kiss of lonely people grasping at comfort, but the slow, deliberate kiss of a woman who'd decided, and a man who'd finally come home. From the loft, a small voice whispered loudly, Hattie, are they kissing? Shut up, Sam. But are they? If you don't close your eyes right now, I'm telling Mama you fed Margaret inside the house again. Silas laughed against Josie's mouth. She laughed too. And in the corner by the window, Clementine held up the drawing she'd been working on all evening. 6 figures standing in front of a cabin. But this time, the tall figure and the woman figure stood close together, their hands drawn touching. And underneath, in the shaky handwriting of a child finding her words again, 2 letters. Us. Spring came to the Bellamy homestead the way spring comes to the mountains, sudden, fierce, and full of noise. The creek thawed and roared. The garden plot softened enough to turn. Bertie took her first real steps across the cabin floor and fell into Silas's arms because he was closest. And Sam declared this proof that she loved Mr. Silas best. And Ezra said that was ridiculous. She just had bad aim. Josie planted the expanded garden she'd been planning all winter, working alongside Silas in a rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. Hattie took over the cooking most mornings, her skills growing sharper and bolder as she experimented beyond her mother's recipes, adding notes of her own to the blue cloth journal in handwriting that was becoming its own. Ezra split wood without being asked, and repaired fences without complaint, and slept through the night for the first time in 2 years, because a man sat in the chair by the door and kept watch. Morrison's federal case against Harrison moved faster than anyone expected. The congressman's network crumbled under the weight of Morrison's evidence, and by April, Harrison had been stripped of his seat and was facing military tribunal for his actions at Willow Creek Bridge. The newspapers covered it widely. Silas's name appeared in headlines across 3 territories, not as a deserter, but as the man who'd saved 12 lives and spent 12 years paying for someone else's cowardice. Ruth's letters came weekly now, full of plans and questions and the particular joy of a sister who'd gotten her brother back. She was coming in the summer, bringing Emma, bringing hope, bringing the other half of a family that had been broken too long. One evening in late May, Josie found Silas standing on the ridge behind the cabin where Robert was buried. He held his hat in his hands, and he was talking quietly to the wooden cross. She almost turned back, but he heard her footsteps and looked over his shoulder. "Just introducing myself," he said. "Figured I owed him that." Josie came to stand beside him. "What did you tell him?" "That I'd take care of what he built. That his children are strong and brave and stubborn as hell, just like their mother. That I'm not trying to replace him, just trying to be worthy of what he left behind." Josie slipped her hand into his. "He would have liked you." "You think?" "I think he would have said you talk too much and ride too slow and your coffee's too strong." She squeezed his fingers. "And then he would have shaken your hand and told you, 'Welcome home.'" Below them, the homestead spread out in the evening light. The cabin, with smoke rising from the chimney. The garden rows, green with new growth. The chicken coop that Ezra had rebuilt twice. The barn, where Silas's horse nickered for her supper. And through the open window came the sounds that filled their lives now. Sam arguing with Margaret the chicken. Hattie singing while she cooked. Bertie banging a spoon against the table. And Clementine's voice, still rare, still rough with newness, reading aloud from her mother's recipe journal to anyone who would listen. Josie leaned against Silas's shoulder. He put his arm around her. They stood on the ridge where Robert Bellamy rested and watched the sun drop behind the mountains. And neither of them said a word, because some moments were too full for language. The truth was simple, even if the road to it hadn't been. A man fell off a horse in a blizzard. A woman chose to drag him inside instead of leaving him in the snow. 5 children decided, each in their own time and their own way, to let a stranger become family. And a homestead that had been held together by nothing but one woman's stubborn refusal to quit became something stronger. A place where broken people mended each other, where silence learned to speak again, where love didn't come wrapped in promises or guarantees, but in stitches sewn by lamplight and bread shared at a table built by hands that were gone, but never forgotten. Silas Thorne stopped running the night Josie Bellamy opened her door. And Josie Bellamy stopped carrying the world alone the night she let him in. That was the whole of it. That was enough. That was everything.